Hi guys, hi, how's it going? How you doing today? Hopefully today finds you well. Today I am doing a fun video about spring and all the palettes that scream spring to me in my collection. Some of these palettes might also be in your collection. I have like roughly 20 palettes to share with you. I promise this won't drag out for an hour. I will be quick about it. But I thought that I would bring to you all the palettes in my collection that draw my attention during this time of year. I have a few of them that I haven't used yet, but know that they are on my list for springtime. Actually, one of them I just used today. It is what is on my eyes today. It's part of my palette roulette. You guys might have saw that video already, but if not, I'll link it up here in the cards for you. And with that said, hi, for those of you new here, my name is Donna. I am a lover of all things high-end, colorful beauty and self-care. I also work in the beauty industry as a district leader for Ulta, so I get a lot of education in my position. I like to bring you guys that education. So you're going to see a lot of reviews here on this channel. There's a lot of hauling on this channel, a lot of also just kind of declutters on this channel through Project Pan, Shop My Stash, all those great things. And I will be doing collection videos here shortly. And yeah, just general makeup chit chat. And you know, if you're here, you also like general makeup chit chat. So I hope that you'll want to subscribe before you go. But with that said, let's roll into this video where I'm going to chat with you about some of the palettes in my collection that kind of scream springtime to me. I can't say that. It took like 12 times to get it out my mouth. God. I have a lot of palettes to jump into today, and in no particular order I am going to go through these palettes with you. I basically went through my inventory of all my palettes, really pulled out the ones that kind of scream spring the most to me. Most of these I have used. There are a couple that I have not used, but they are on my agenda to get some use this spring. So let's just kind of roll through these palettes rocket fire review like. So the first brand I have is, Norvina, ABH Norvina, I guess. Of the palettes that I have in my collection, these two really scream spring to me. So when I think through the lens of spring, I think like corals and like maybe some fluorescent colors, some greens, some oranges, like pops of more muted tones of that I would see in the summer, because like summertime comes around and I'm thinking real 80s vibes, if I'm honest. But these two palettes to me feel like more spring color stories to me, and they are these. I think this one feels more springy to me just because it's got, you know, those muted pinks. It's also got kind of a hot pink nature to it. It's got those corals, those lavenders, that periwinkle vibe to it. I really do dig this palette for spring. I think of flowers, right? Fresh, brand new flowers when I pick up that palette. And this one, I think of grass. Like fresh cut grass. I don't know why that is what I think of with this palette, but it is. And because of that, it kind of screams spring to me. It's kind of got those like more muted tones to it, not tones that you would typically see in like summertime where we're a little bit more bright, a little bit more vibrant, but it also definitely isn't a fall or winter palette in my collection as I determine it. Of course, makeup is subjective and you do you, boo, but this palette definitely is more of a springtime palette in my collection, in my opinion. And of course, that's all this is right now, is my opinion. Another one I have here is an oldie but a goodie, and this one I got so long ago, and I got it because at the time I wasn't going to spend my money on Natasha Denona, and this one reminded me a lot of the Sunset palette, and I wanted the Sunset palette. I currently have the Sunset palette, but this one still sees some use in my collection during the spring time frame, and this is the Colourpop Yes Please or Cute AF. I'm not really sure. You guys, look, this is so disgusting. This used to be white. This is no longer white. But this is the palette. I really love this color story. Again, it goes back to what I really think of when I think of spring is those muted tones of the brighter tones that we see during the summertime, right? So corals versus vibrant oranges, pinks versus vibrant, you know, hot pinks and reds. I really just love yellow. This palette has a yellow in it. That is another real springtime kind of color in my opinion. So I really think that this kind of reminds me of like the beach. And I don't know why that screams spring to me and not summer, but it truly does. This is definitely a springtime palette in my opinion in my collection. The next one I have is this one, and this is a palette that I purchased last year that I think when I purchased it, I said it really kind of reminds me of springtime, and that is the Colitis Escape Pod palette. Oh, the colors in this. Now, this top row leans very spring in my opinion. Now, of course, this orange and this pink are a little bit more vibrant than I think of when I think springtime. But I think that also with the rest of the colors in this palette, it really kind of tells a story. And I think the story is Easter Bunny. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I really do think this reminds me of coloring Easter eggs. This is another palette that screams spring. I think I'm gonna quit saying palettes that scream spring because every time I do, I screw it up. So we're just gonna go, all of these scream spring to me. So the next one I have here is the BH Cosmetics Color Festival palette. And I went back and forth with this one or the Weekend Festival palette, but I think Weekend Festival in my mind screams more summertime than this one does. So this is the Color Festival palette, and this is what it looks like. Again, we just have some of those muted, more coral tones. We have like lavender and mint and like this like kind of fluorescent, almost the color of the packaging yellow. It's got some darker tones in here, which if you took these out, this definitely screams spring. With these tones, I don't really know why these tones are in here. If I'm honest with you, I don't really think it goes with the palette, and I think I said that in my palette roulette of this palette, but definitely a springtime palette in my collection. I definitely pull for it around these time frames. The next one I have is this. This is the Viseart Sultry Muse palette. This one is all shimmer, but it is such just a really muted, again, pastel-y kind of Easter eggy kind of vibe to it. The darkest in here is this one here and this one here, and they're not really actually even that dark. I think that through the lens of springtime and what I think of, this just definitely says that to me. I don't pull for this as much as I would love to because it is all shimmer, but I do love this to go along with many of my other palettes that I'm pulling here. It just has the perfect epitome of Easter egg pastel shimmers in my opinion. The next one I have here, again, Cotton Candy Skies, reminds me of that, and that is the Lunar Beauty Strawberry Dreams. Now this could sway very much into the spectrum of summer palettes for me. So this one maybe is that late spring, early summer palette that I need for transition, you know, into the new season. But this is definitely a palette that I think of when I think of spring. This one here, just so beautiful. All of these mattes in here, gorgeous. Like, I came up with some of the best eye looks with this palette. I will be linking my palette roulette series. I have done a palette roulette on every single one of these eyeshadow palettes. So please, I implore you to go watch that. The next one I think of is the, total natural lighting. The sun is kind of crazy sauce right now. This is the Juvias Place Deuce palette, and tell me this doesn't remind you of spring. Again, very Easter eggy vibe. We have, you know, this really pretty, like, just muted, like, beigey tone, but then we have this beautiful coral up here, beautiful pink right here. This is the best mint green shimmer on the planet. This one kind of doesn't go, but it does a really great job of creating some kind of balance and symmetry and depth in this palette that wouldn't exist if that color didn't exist in the palette. But I do quite love this palette, specifically in the springtime. And then I also have this guy here, which is the Sugar Pill Fun Size palette. Now, my friend Grace got me this palette. Look how cute that is. She got me this palette in California because I couldn't find it anywhere in our stores here. And it, again, is just that pastel, like Easter eggy vibe to it, which reminds me of spring. The yellows here, the greens are very minty, very beautiful, but not like redundant, I feel like. The lavender, the periwinkle, a good periwinkle is definitely a vibe for spring. So this one definitely gives me those feelings. And then speaking of periwinkle, the next one that I pull, and this one is kind of a stretch if I'm honest, because it does lean a little bit deep, but the other colors in this, like this periwinkle, this really pretty pink shade here, some of these really remind me of spring, and then you can get that depth that you need out of these other shades here. This is the ABH Norvina palette, in case you were wondering, because I didn't introduce it properly, but this one definitely has a spring essence to it that isn't existing in a lot of the other ABH palettes. And then this one here also reminds me of spring, and it's the ABH Carly Bible palette. I think when I think of spring, I even think of this one before I think of Norvina. Norvina was kind of an afterthought for me because of that periwinkle shade in it, but this one definitely has the spring tone vibes in it. I love the shimmers in this palette. These two specifically are gorgeous shimmers. So this again is the ABH Carly Bible palette. Definitely a springtime palette in my opinion. I have two from Huda Beauty, and one of them is not really my favorite. You'll see that in the palette roulette if you go and watch that. But I do have the Purple Haze palette by Huda, and I also have the Coral Obsessions. This one is probably one of the first ones that came to mind when I was like, springtime palettes, what's in my collection? This one for sure. Again, it's the corals, the lavenders, the you know, dusty pinks, the aquas, yellows, bubblegums, those kind of shades, and this one has the lavenders in it for me. So I really do think that these two are perfect for springtime. This one would be my preferred of the two, but both of them really have a nice spring vibe to them. And then as a little kind of throw in the pan here, I know that this is just a little palette, and I don't think that this company sells anymore or is closing down or something. This is the Midas Artistry Palette Volume 1. I did have Volume 1 and Volume 1.2. And even though this looks very, very vibrant on camera, it is very, very much pastel. And it is like pastels on crack. This is probably the best pastel palette that I have in my collection, minus the Sugar Pill palette. I think that the Sugar Pill palette has some really great pastels in it. This I got in a Valentine's Day like mystery box from them with its volume 1.2 as well. They were just so similar that I was like, I can get rid of one of these palettes. So I got rid of the other one because these ones are a little bit less pastel than the ones in the 1.2. So more up my alley than that one. But man, this shade here, Perfect Coral. This shade here, beautiful duochrome that's kind of like pinky purple flippy. Oh, so pretty. Wonderful palettes. It's just a shame. A Midas was on my list to try more of for this year, and I just don't see a reason to anymore. So an oldie but a goodie for me is also this one. This is the Too Faced Peach, Sweet Peach palette, and I think it's just got all of those like peachy neutral tones and smells like peaches, which also reminds me of spring. So maybe that's why it's on my list. I don't think it's as much of a stretch as it could be, even though these darker shades exist in the palette, because the rest of the palette is just such a pretty like peachy, sagey green, like kind of muted brown tone palette. It is so pretty, so pretty, and such a great palette for springtime. Another one that I picked up, again, not one of my favorite palettes, and maybe this one leans a little bit on that fine line of could it be spring, could it be another season. And again, makeup is subjective, so you can do what you want with your palettes. But another one that really screams spring to me is the Color Drain Juicy Boost. So this one screams spring to me mostly because of these tones here. This is, I do have the one that is like 2 levels of shadows versus kind of like a book versus like a lay flat. This is what screams spring to me. These are very pastel in nature. You have to build them up really well. This is, again, not one of my favorite palettes, but the reason why it's not a favorite palette for me are these shimmers down here. I would say don't touch those. If you get this palette, if you have this palette, those are a hot damn mess. But other than that, like, these are the other shades, and while some of these really do kind of lean into that spring vibe for me, I think these two specifically, and this whole row here specifically, these 6 right here do more than any of the other shades in this palette. So again, another palette that I think I will pull for more in the springtime than any other palette. I only have 4 more palettes really that I have used, and 3 that I'm going to talk to you about that I really haven't used, and ones that I will be pulling for this spring. This one is the Sigma Beauty Enchanted palette. This is so pretty. This is definitely got some like deeper tones over here, but the rest of this palette really is a beautiful duochromatic kind of springtime feel to it. It's definitely got that on the cover too. As you guys can see, the purple to pink to blue. That's kind of what's going on in this palette too. It does have some mattes in it, but the mattes are really muted mattes. Really the star of the show here is the shimmers, and I feel like these shimmers are definitely springtime shimmers. Not that, again, not that you can't wear any kind of makeup anytime you want to wear it, just these are the ones in my collection that I feel like scream spring to me. Then I have this one, Morphe Sweet Oasis. I think when I reviewed this, I said that I would pick it back up in the spring because I do feel like it is largely a springtime palette. These 2 bottom rows here, maybe not so much, but all of these pastels in here, and to be honest, this isn't, like, it is kind of chalky, but it isn't a horrible palette to work with. My palette roulette I do have up. It's not my favorite color story, but I didn't have a bad time working with this palette and creating some really brilliant eye looks. I think this like section of greens here really brings it home for me as far as, you know, the spring thought process goes. Then I have 2 more. And these 2 really are the stars of the show, in my opinion, as far as spring goes. I have the Violet Voss Flamingo palette. You know, when I first saw this palette, and this palette has been in my collection for so long. When I first saw this palette, I think it was like summertime, but I remember thinking, this is definitely a springtime palette more than it is anything else. And I know the sun is kind of like creating havoc here, but this is a beautiful like aqua, minty aqua blue. Oh my gosh, such a beautiful, and so pigmented. This row here creates such a beautiful eye look. Even this pink dipped into this whole row here, such a beautiful eye look. We have this beautiful lavender here, you have this beautiful coral here, this beautiful like blue silver duochrome. Oh my gosh, this is just such a beautiful palette. And then the last one is this one, which is the Natasha Denona Trio Chrome. And I think this was launched like sometime in Christmas time, right? In her like holiday launch. And I remember when I looked at this thinking, God, that looks more like a springtime palette. And it definitely does. I think that you guys could probably see it too. Even the Trio Chromes down the center are more muted in tone than they could be. And this definitely has that pastel Easter egg like vibe to it. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. I would love to know what your thoughts are on this. But this is definitely a palette that I know that I will be pulling for. So some palettes that I also have in my collection that I haven't used yet, but I will be pulling for this spring because they just are definitely springtime palettes, is this one. This is by IPSY. This is the Enlighten palette, and this, as a matter of fact, is the palette that is on my eyes today, and the one that I pulled into my palette roulette for this week because it definitely screams spring to me. It also kind of reminds me of the All Pastel palette that just came out by Natasha Denona. I have to tell you, I'm a little disappointed in this palette right now, just off just this one time's use, because there's not very many mattes in here. And I know that you can't really tell that on screen, but there are 20 eyeshadows in here, and I think 4 of them are mattes. And if you know, you know, I like a little bit of a 50-50 kind of mix. When I look at a palette, in order to be perfection for me, it really needs to have a good balance of mattes to shimmers, and this one just doesn't, and I think that that's why I am super disappointed with it. But it definitely has that springtime vibe to it. This blue right here is in my eye look today, as well as this blue, and I just think it's beautiful. Now, I did have to pull in another palette to kind of get the depth in my eye look today. But this brown is also in this eye look. I just think it's a beautiful palette, and I think it's great for spring. And I wish the sun wasn't creating such havoc in this palette. But like down here, we have this beautiful like lavender shade, and we have a beautiful like peachy pink shade. Again, this is one of those like periwinkle like blue tones and a really bright green. I just think it definitely has springtime vibes. I won't know 100% how I feel about this palette until I do my palette roulette video on it next week or this week or whenever you're seeing this. I do think that this definitely has the springtime vibe feel to it. The next one I have is this one, and this is the Ace Beauty Nostalgia palette, and this one could swing summer as well. I think it's another one of those palettes that could help me move or transition from spring into summertime eye looks, because it's definitely got those darker, brighter, more vivid tones that I wear a lot during the summertime, but it's also got a lot of the pastels. It's got that beautiful yellow, this like kind of mustard yellow look, this kind of like orangey salmon color down here, beautiful pink. I really love the looks of this palette, so super excited to pull for that one. This is the Nomad Cartagena Magica. I'm not sure how to say that, but this is what the outside of the palette looks like, and look at that just beautiful chaos going on the outside of this palette. This is what the inside looks like. Tell me that doesn't look like spring. Yes. Everything that I'm going for in spring is in this palette. The oranges, the corals, the yellows, the pinks, the lavenders. It's all here. It's all here. Tell me what you guys think of the palettes that I chose to pull into this video for perfect palettes for spring time that exist in my collection. I would be interested to know what your perfect springtime palettes are. And again, like I said earlier in this video, you know, makeup is subjective. You can do what you want. Please don't think that because I said this is the perfect springtime palette, I wouldn't also wear it in the fall, because I absolutely would. You all know me. You know me well, and I like me some color. I've worn this in the winter time. It doesn't bother me. You do you, boo. I'm gonna do me. But these are the palettes that when I sit down and think of what palettes in my collection really scream this time of year to me, it is these palettes. And I know that I shared a lot with you, but I would love to hear your feedback on the palettes that I shared with you, or any of the palettes that you have in your collection that you might also think scream spring. With that said, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I do hope that you enjoyed the video. I hope that you'll want to give it a thumbs up. I hope that you'll subscribe before you go. And I hope that 2022 is treating you all kindly so far this year. I hope that you and yours are safe and healthy and well and getting along as best you can in this crazy, chaotic world. I also hope that you're loving each other, but loving each other from afar. And until next time, bye, friends.